Every man who's ever held authority knows this truth, and that's that power tests you harder than pain. Because pain reveals your limits, whereas power reveals your heart. And what you do with power really exposes whether you lead from love or from fear. See, most of us, we don't set out trying to dominate, I think. We start trying to help people. We want to guide, we want to protect, we want to provide. But then somewhere along the way, leadership gets infected by the ego, by exhaustion, by the need to be in control. And what once was direction now quietly becomes domination. And it doesn't happen overnight. I think it starts small, with these small compromises along the way, where we interrupt instead of listen, where we correct instead of connecting, where we demand instead of developing. And then before long, what we call leadership is really just control in a nicer outfit. At Bintegers, we believe that leadership isn't about power. Leadership is about presence. Because power without integrity really collapses. But presence, like grounded, humble, aware presence, that builds trust. Real men don't need to dominate to lead. They embody the truth so deeply that people around them feel safe to follow. And that's the kind of leadership that we're rebuilding here. Not louder, but clearer. Somewhere along the line, men were told that leading means having the final word, right? That authority meant superiority, and that respect must be demanded instead of earned. But that model isn't strength, though. That model is more like survival. Survival conditioning from generations, perhaps, of men who were never allowed to lead through love. Our fathers perhaps weren't shown tenderness, and so they led through tension. And our mentors, they weren't modeled what humility could look like, and so they led through hierarchy. And now we must take control for clarity, because it's all we've basically ever seen. But leadership that's built on fear, it always ends the same way. It's lonely at the top, right? And disconnected at the source of the heart. Domination is, I think, what happens when leadership forgets its purpose. When guiding turns into guarding, right? And when influence now becomes intimidation. When the goal shifts from empowering others to protecting your own image. And we do this because we think it makes us feel respected. But domination, it doesn't create respect. Domination creates resentment. It breeds compliance instead of connection. It silences the truth in the name of loyalty. And the irony of all this, it's that the more we dominate, the more we lose the very thing that we're trying to secure, which is trust. I think we need to be honest about something here. And that leadership is seductive. Leadership feeds your ego. It makes you feel important, indispensable, and invincible, perhaps. And if you're not careful, that feeling becomes quite addictive. Because the moment your worth gets attached to being followed, it's then that you stop leading. And it's then that you perhaps start performing. And you stop seeing people as hearts and start seeing them instead as metrics. And you stop hearing, how can I serve? And now you start thinking, how can I stay in control? And that's not leadership. That's fear disguised as strategy. Control always creeps in when love feels risky. It's easier to dominate than to have dialogue. It's easier to dictate than to have a discussion. It's easier to be right than to be real. But domination is a coward's version, I would say, of leadership. It's power without presence, or confidence without compassion. It's direction without discernment. And the cost of this is massive, because domination may very well win you followers, but it will lose you connection. And connection is where legacy lives. We've built a whole generation of men who think that leadership means being unchallenged. But if no one around you feels safe enough to even question you, you're not leading. You're lording it over them. You've built in essence a dictatorship, and not a direction that you're guiding others towards. And the truth is, real leaders invite friction. They don't push back, they welcome it, because they understand that truth cannot thrive in fear. And that's the litmus test there. If people around you are afraid to be honest with you, then you've crossed that line from leadership to domination. But let's talk a little bit about where this all starts. I think domination is really born in insecurity. It's the same fear that we've been unpacking throughout this entire series, and that is the fear of irrelevance, the fear of failure, the fear of not being enough. And when you don't feel secure within, you try to secure everything around you then, right? You micromanage, you over-explain, you overcorrect, and you start thinking that the tighter you grip, the safer you'll feel. But that grip, it's not safety, that's suffocation. Confidence creates room for others to breathe, whereas domination just drains the oxygen from a room. And you can tell the difference by how people act around you. Do they shrink, or do they shine? Do they echo you, or just evolve beside you? Because healthy leadership multiplies strength, whereas domination just kind of hoards all the strength for itself. Domination says, I need to be the biggest voice in the room, whereas leadership would say, I'm here to make sure that everyone has a voice in this room and that they know that they matter. That's the shift from ego to integrity. Listen, if this hits home for you, it's probably because you've been on both sides of this, right? The dominated side and the dominator. And maybe you've worked for the boss who led through fear. Maybe you've been that father or that coach, that partner, the one who thought that control was care. And now you're realizing that it wasn't. Now, this awareness is not shame. It's maturity. It's what separates the boy who wants power from the man who wants a sense of purpose. Because the mature man, he realizes that domination is really a trauma response. It's what happens when fear hijacks authority. And when leadership becomes a coping mechanism instead of a calling, that's the same realm as well. And we have to redefine leadership altogether, I would say. It's not about being followed. It's about being trusted. It's not about commanding attention as much as it's about cultivating alignment, right? It's not about getting results through fear. It's about building resilience through safety. And that's what true masculine leadership looks like. It's stewardship, not supremacy. It's guidance, not governance, right? It's service and not a spectacle. See, I've seen men who can run corporations but cannot hold conversations. These are men who can inspire crowds but have difficulty apologizing to their own children. Men who can actually set boundaries but can't really receive affection. That's what domination costs us. It costs us depth. Because you can't dominate and connect at the same time. Domination creates obedience, but it kills intimacy. And without intimacy, your influence will always be hollow. So if you're feeling perhaps the sting of this truth, that's a good thing, I'd say. That's not condemnation, it's correction. It means that your leadership is ready to evolve. And that's the work where that's the work that we go deeper in this course I have, In the Ashes of the Alpha Male. This foundational course on my website helps you to spot how ego and insecurity hide your leadership style, and how what looks like confidence is really often a control strategy. So this deep dive course walks you through rebuilding authority from the inside out, rooted in integrity and not in intimidation. And you can find this course, In the Ashes of the Alpha Male, at uberbintegers.com, which is my website. And it's because we don't need more men who are in charge. We need more men who are in check. Domination might get you compliance, but confidence gets you commitment. Control might win you the moment, yes, but trust is what wins generations. The leaders who change the world aren't the ones who rule it. They're the ones who restore it. They remind us that strength isn't about being above others. It's about being for others. And that's the kind of masculinity that we want to remember. That's the kind of leadership I think that we are aiming to reclaim. So here's the question I think every man needs to ask himself, and that is, am I leading to be loved, or am I loving to lead? Because one is about the ego, whereas the other one is more about the essence. And essence is what endures when everything else falls apart. See, leadership becomes domination the moment that you stop listening. So maybe the first act of real leadership is silence. Silence long enough to hear the truth behind or beneath your title. That's where we're heading next, because leadership without presence, it leads to performance, and performance without peace leads to burnout. So in our next episode tomorrow, we'll talk about what happens when men confuse power with presence, and how to rebuild authority from calm instead of from chaos. So that's in episode 10, I believe, where we've titled it Power Without Presence is Just Performance. I hope I'll see you in that episode. Thank you for listening in. Drop me a comment down below. Any questions, insights, I'd love to hear them. See you tomorrow.